All right, let's do this. We're about to go on a total whirlwind tour of the U.S. economy. Seriously, we're covering everything from colonial farms all the way to the global powerhouse we see today. Buckle up, let's jump right in.
To really get a grip on this story, you just have to look at this one stat. Back in 1900, most Americans, like 60% of them, lived out in the country. But today, a whopping 75% of us are in cities. So, what happened? Well, that massive shift was powered by the very economic engine we're going to unpack right now.
Okay, so here's the plan. We'll kick things off with the colonies and the birth of capitalism, then dive into the huge industrial transformation. After that, we'll hit the boom, bust, and war period, check out the rise of the post-war superpower, and finally, land in today's globalized economy.
All right, Section 1, from colonies to capitalism. We're talking about the 1600s to the early 1800s. And really, this is the story of forging a national economy.
So you got to understand, before the revolution, there wasn't really a single American economy. It was more like two completely different worlds living side by side. You had the North, right? They were all about timber, building ships, fishing. Then you had the South, which was a totally different story. Their whole economy was built on huge plantations growing cash crops like tobacco and cotton, and it was all powered by the brutal system of enslaved labor. But here's the kicker. For all their differences, they both depended entirely on Britain.
Okay, so picture this. The war is won, but the new country is flat broke. The economy's in shambles. And then this guy, Alexander Hamilton, steps onto the scene. He comes up with this wild idea, a real game changer. He says, hey, let's have the new federal government take on all the debt from all the states. People thought he was crazy. I mean, why would a state like Virginia want to pay for Massachusetts' bills? But Hamilton's big bet worked. It created a single, unified national credit, and honestly, it laid the financial foundation for everything that came next.
So, what do we call this system that Hamilton and the founders were building? Well, it's called capitalism, and the core idea is pretty simple. Trade and industry are controlled by private owners who are trying to make a profit. It's not the government calling all the shots. The whole point is that individuals and companies are the ones driving the economy forward, innovating, competing, and building the country's wealth from the ground up.
Now, it's not quite that simple, of course. It's not like it's some kind of pure Wild West capitalism. Over the years, the U.S. actually evolved into what we call a mixed economy. And what that means is, yeah, you have private businesses, but the government definitely has a role to play. It steps in to regulate things, to provide safety nets for people, and to protect consumers. It's really all about finding a balance between that free enterprise spirit and having some government oversight. Okay, on to our next chapter. The Great Industrial Transformation. We're jumping into the mid-1800s to the early 1900s. This is when America completely changes, going from a nation of farmers to an absolute industrial giant. So what was the secret sauce behind this massive explosion of growth? Well, it was really a perfect storm of things. You had railroads stretching from coast to coast, connecting everything. Then there was the mass production of steel, which literally built our modern cities. Factories started pumping out goods like never before, creating this whole new culture of, buying stuff. And on top of all that, you saw the rise of these gigantic corporations, monopolies like John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil, that basically controlled entire industries. But this industrial boom wasn't just about money and factories. It completely reshaped American society. Millions of people packed up and left their farms for a shot at a factory job in these new booming cities, which were often super crowded. And, as you can imagine, the working conditions weren't great. We're talking long hours, low pay, pretty dangerous stuff. So what happened? Workers started banding together, forming unions to fight for better treatment and basic rights. And now we get to the real roller coaster ride, Section 3, Boom, Bust, and War. This period, from the 20s to 45, was just an absolute time of extremes.
I mean, just look at the speed of these changes. Talk about whiplash. You've got the roaring 20s, this decade of incredible prosperity and parties, and then, bam, the 1929 stock market crash just wipes everything out overnight. That throws the country into the Great Depression for a whole decade of serious hardship. And the only thing that really pulls the economy out of it? The massive industrial ramp-up for World War II. It's just one extreme to the next. If you want to understand just how bad the Great Depression was, just look at this one number, 25%. In 1933, that was the peak unemployment rate. That means 1 out of every 4 people who wanted a job couldn't find one. Think about that. Look around a room of your 4 closest friends or family members. One of them would have been out of work. It was a national catastrophe that really shook America to its very foundations.
So, in the face of this disaster, President Franklin Roosevelt rolls out his New Deal. And look, this wasn't just some small fix-it plan. This was a fundamental change in how the country worked. You get programs like Social Security, creating a safety net for the elderly that's still here today. You have huge public works programs putting millions of people back to work building roads and dams. This was a complete game changer. For the first time, the federal government was taking a massive, hands-on role in the everyday economy.
So the war finally ends the Depression, and it kicks off what a lot of people call the golden age of the American economy. This is our next section, the post-war superpower, from 1945 all the way to 2000. This is where the U.S. becomes the undisputed top dog on the world stage.
So how on earth did this golden age happen? What was the recipe? Well, it was a few key ingredients. First, you had the GI Bill. It sent a whole generation of returning soldiers to college and helped them buy homes. That was huge. Second, manufacturing was booming. There were tons of stable, well-paying jobs. Put those things together and what do you get? You get the biggest, richest middle class the world had ever seen, and all their spending is what fueled the economy for decades.
But of course, nothing stays the same forever. Towards the end of the 20th century, the economy started to shift gears in a really big way. We went from being a country that primarily makes stuff, manufacturing, to a country that primarily does stuff. We became a service-based economy. Think tech, finance, healthcare. That's where the new center of gravity was.
And that shift really brings us right up to the present day, to our final section, today's globalized economy. We're talking about the year 2000 up to now, in a world that is more interconnected than ever before.
So what does globalized economy really mean? Well, think of it like a giant tangled web. Everything is connected. A problem in one corner of the world can spread like wildfire to everywhere else. And we have a perfect, if painful, example of this, the 2008 financial crisis. What started as a housing market collapse right here in the US ended up sending massive shockwaves across the entire planet and kicking off a worldwide recession. That's globalization in action. So after this whole journey, how do we grade these different eras? Let's take a look at the report card. The Gilded Age, the Roaring '20s, and that incredible post-war boom, they all get straight A's. Why? Because you had super fast growth and low inflation, meaning the economy was getting bigger and your dollar was worth something. But then you have the Great Depression. Yikes, a D+. Not just because of the crazy high unemployment, but because of deflation. That's when prices actually fall, which sounds good, but it's a sign of a really, really sick economy. It's just a stark reminder of how fragile this whole system can be.
So when you look back, it's pretty incredible, right? The U.S. economy has completely remade itself over and over again. It went from being all about farms and fields to giant factories and now to services, finance, and tech. Which leaves us with one massive final question to think about. What's the next great transformation? And maybe, just maybe, are we living through it right now?